So riddle me this. We have heard how great AI is. There's just no question of all the positive and some negative press that we're hearing. But why is it when you dial your bank, because call volume's so high, you get put on hold? Or because you go to work and a lot of the business processes that you're doing is still by passing a spreadsheet around instead of putting it into a system? Hi there, I'm Roy, and welcome to My Code Corner, where we talk about topics in computer science and technology. And for today's session, we're going to answer, or at least try to answer that one question. If AI is so great, why aren't all businesses using it? So to begin with, first off, I will give you a little bit of my background. I am a 35-year technology veteran. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science, specializing in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've also held roles from developer to solutions architect, all the way up to being a senior technology executive at a Fortune 10 company. So I have seen the gambit, and part of the reason I decided to create this channel is so I can actually give my perspective, my opinions on a lot of these topics. So definitely invite you to join the channel by hitting that subscribe. But let's get back to that question, is why aren't businesses using AI? Before I begin to start answering that, let me clarify what I mean by business. What I simply mean is not artificial intelligence companies or AI adjacent companies. So not the Anthropics, the NVIDIAs, the Microsofts, those that actually are doing AI or doing things that a lot of the revenues basically getting created because of AI. Put those to the side, because they're using AI because that's kind of what they do. I'm also not talking about startups. Startups, while a lot of them are using, especially a lot of the newer startups, a lot of them are using AI to do things, but really they're not nothing wrong with startups. I totally respect everyone who does them, and more power to you. I hope you all make $1 billion. But right now, they're just not a big enough lift to change much. What I'm talking about are those legacy blue chip companies. I want to, talking about the Exxons, the Bank of America's, Cardinal Health, any of those multi-billion-dollar companies, generates billions and billions of dollars of revenue with hundreds of thousands of employees in a global market. The ones that, if they were truly switching all the processes to AI, you're going to hear about it in the news. We're not seeing it, and the companies that I've worked for, the massive companies, not seeing it there either. Or if they are doing anything, like my company right now, the things that they're doing is extremely small, the little prototype projects, the pilots. Matter of fact, before I decided to video today, I actually got an email and getting invited to a pilot. Just another thing to try out some stuff because, again, not an AI company, but these companies are going to try. Now, these companies, again, they're going to try stuff, but there's a lot of hindrances. There's hurdles that's going to prevent them from moving. What you'll find, especially these large companies, is that they're extremely conservative. And they're conservative really for one thing. And I'm not talking conservative from a political point of view. I'm talking about they're economically conservative. These are typically publicly traded companies that if they did things that would be negative to the shareholders, the value of the stock goes down. Typically, CEOs gets removed from situations like that. Perfect example of that would be Adobe recently, because yes, their CEO stepped down, but if you saw their stock prices before that happened, it was plummeting through the ground. So if the stock goes down, CEOs don't survive. So these are extremely conservative companies. And the points I'm going to make today is really the hurdles that, as a conservative company, they're real. And they're real for a reason. So the first point I'll talk about, and as we all know, anyone that's done anything with AI, the ins and outs, the thing that makes an AI great is the data that it has in it. Now, over the years, you had all the different models in, they keep getting better and better. And really, they get better and better because they're consuming more data. They're having more parameters that can actually transform. That's the T in like a GPT. But they have the most rich set of data that they potentially can. But they might not have the company's data. Because one thing about companies is that depending on what it is, companies are typically, they hold their data very close to the chest because, that's their competitive advantage. Now, these companies, they've as they've been around for decades, honestly, you'll find that this data tends to get very, very messy because you've got technology changes, you've got product changes, you've got personnel changes. But it's very messy. It's very siloed because a lot of these companies, they do a lot of work in silos. They don't tend to cross-share, sometimes because they can't, but a lot of times it's because, you have this one organizational group or this one business unit. They're going to keep their stuff contained with themselves. The other problem is a lot of this data sometimes gets very, very inconsistent. All you need is from one release to another. If you add a field or delete a field or whatnot, it usually don't delete a field, it messes up your databases. But when you add fields, you'll start seeing, very, very inconsistent data. This is also data, and I know this from unfortunate experience, this is data that's very not documented very well. Because, if you've been a developer for any length of time, one of the things that developers really hate to do is documentation. So you may get either very lackadaisical documentation, very sparse documentation, or heaven help you, no documentation whatsoever because it's tribal knowledge that was stuck in somebody's head who retired 3 years ago. For a company to actually utilize AI when you have this data, because you need this data, because this is the stuff that's driving your business. This is the stuff that's making you money. And your systems can use it now, but the AI, because it doesn't understand this, what you really would have to do is try to organize and clean the data. Problem with that is that anytime you start building systems, cleaning the data, because you're going to have to build these systems. First off, it takes a long time to do this because you got to decode what it is, and if it's an undocumented system, that makes it even more difficult. But it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of development work to do this. And of course, when you're talking about development work, means it's an extremely expensive task. And when you're doing this and you're using your developers to do that piece, guess what they're not doing? They're actually not writing your revenue generating work. So instead of generating more revenue and decreasing operational costs, which are the two ways of actually making your company worth more, you're going to decrease revenue and you're going to increase operational cost. I mentioned CEOs don't last through things like that. Yeah, this is one of those cases, or at least, the directors or whatnot. The other problem with data, and this is systems that I've worked on, is there are data that is very, very heavy regulated and has to fall through compliance. I will admit, if I never have to hear the words privileged and confidential ever again, I will be a very happy man. This data, if you do something wrong, at minimum, you can be in violation of whatever your regulatory body is. If it's financial, if it's healthcare, those type of days, and protected health information, personal identificational information, or card data, the three big ones. If you make mistakes on those, at minimum, you'll be lucky not just to be fired. Some of those cases, I know Anthem had this problem where they actually had a breach. People go to jail for stuff like that. Well, because of how protected this data is, there's a lot of regulation that says you cannot use these in AI. Honestly, a lot of the data I was working with in the time, I couldn't even basically have one table could see the other. I had to partition them off separately, simply because the potential cross-contamination could cause, again, privileged and confidential communications, which again, I hate being in lawyers' offices. So there's very strict frameworks. It's preventing you from being able to leverage this data. So you can't put it in AI. And of course, if you can't put it in AI, it means you're not using AI because you're not getting that full advantage of using all your data. Now, data is a problem. There's no question. It's a foundational problem in any company. And that's one of the advantages of being a startup is you probably don't have a lot of that data, so you're not going to have these issues as you grow potentially. The second thing that I would mention, and this is a huge part, especially for these large companies, is that these organizations are extremely complex. You're talking about companies that are tens, if not hundreds of thousand employees. Potentially a company where you have a massive, overhead company, something like what Alphabet for Google. Google is just the search engine. It's one of the BUs under Alphabet, just like Waymo and YouTube and the likes of those. There's a bunch of them too. A lot of companies are built that way, where you have multiple business units underneath this large corporate umbrella. Because you have these different companies, how they work is different from each other. And I'll tell you, even inside each one of those little, I'm going to call it a silo, even if it's not a silo, it's actually an individual entity itself. They have their own legacy systems. They have their own processes. They have their own independencies within that organization. And when you're talking about talking across multiple organizations, yeah, forget about it. It gets extremely complex. Problem when you've got a complexity like this. Again, I mentioned being very conservative because what happens is when you pull that one thread, you got to be very careful that you don't ripple and break multiple systems. Because even though you may get operational efficiency with that one piece that you did, if you've broken more pieces, again, operational costs go up because you got to start maintaining. You may be forcing people to go down the path that they weren't planning to go to yet, or they can't go to because maybe the data they have is that protected data I mentioned before. Because of the complexity here, one of the big problems that a lot of these businesses, as they're starting to move, is they will get that spreadsheet. They will get that PowerPoint. They'll say, "Oh, look, if I do this much work, we're going to save this much money. We're going to generate this much revenue." But when you're talking about enterprise architecture, there's so many pieces that you have to deal with that it's pretty standard. It takes longer, it costs more, and it doesn't generate as much. So there is a return on investment where you might calculate it out, but most of the time, especially in these large complex organizations, it's wrong. Finally, and this is, I'm seeing this firsthand myself right now, is that just changing a system out, you just want to change that one little piece, that one little thing and say, okay, we're going to make it AI. That's not always a technical decision because, when you're dealing, especially when you're dealing with data, protected data or whatnot, or you're dealing with personnel, there's a lot of seats at the table. For example, the boards that I get to play on, you've got legal there because you got to make sure what you're doing is legally correct and you're not violating any law anywhere. You've got cybersecurity there because if you're dealing with data, you're touching systems. Are you creating a threat vector that somebody else can get into your system and do very bad things? You've got HR there because if you are doing systems that might impact personnel, especially if you have union employees, I can't fathom the amount of conversation that has to happen. So it's more than just a technology problem. It's a people problem. Next thing I want to talk about, I'm going to tell you a little story. So I was not too long ago, I was trying to drive from Hollywood to LAX. And of course, when I was going, it was a Thursday afternoon rush hour. And if anybody knows anything about LA traffic, if you try to go on a Thursday at rush hour, all the highways, they're toast. There's no way you're going to get on this. So it's purely back roads the whole way. So my wife was driving, I was navigating, because definitely it's a tag team affair when you're trying to navigate LA rush hour traffic. And we're going through, everything's running fine until it wasn't. You hit that stretch, it's 3 lanes dropping down to 1 lane, everything's backed up. So time to pull out your whatever map app you have and you start navigating around it. Of course, because it's moving so fast, something like Waze isn't going to be quick enough for you. So that's what I'm doing. I'm navigating, she's driving, we're going to just get through this area. So we're navigating through this neighborhood, and we get onto a cross street that was busy, but it wasn't backed up like what was going on before. And it was 2 turn lanes, and you had 3 straight lanes. And of course, we were 4th, 5th in line in the right most of the 2 left turn lanes at a red light, waiting for that to go. The 3 lanes that was going straight, green light. And we're sitting there. Everybody is still pretty close together. There's no gaps left between people. And a Waymo pulls up. And of course, that Waymo, it's in the it's in the leftmost of the straight lanes. Green light. Stops. Again, there's a lot of traffic still going this way. This Waymo stops, puts on its blinker to try to cut off people. Now, behind us was like 20 cars. So not only was it being extremely rude, I think we've all had those drivers before, but because it was now blocking a lane of traffic that had a green light, it was actually breaking the law, or at least breaking regulation. Well, the question comes to mind, in this situation like this, who gets a ticket? If a cop came by and saw that, could they pull it over and who would get a ticket? There was no driver. Second thing would be, what would happen if that Waymo would have just cut? Because there was no gap. There was no way that it could get in. But what if it cut in and hit somebody? Who's accountable? Well, those are questions, again, as a very conservative company, they actually take into consideration. Right now, there's a lot dealing with AI that is very, very unknown. I mentioned this one thing. Do I think Waymo would end up getting tagged for it? Yeah, probably, but I don't know. And I remember back, to let my age out a little bit, I was a developer before the internet. So I remember back when things like hacking into networks and the likes just started. I remember when the Cliff Stoll Cuckoo's Egg book first came out. So a lot of the laws back then didn't exist. The ones that we have today about hacking into a system, or all of the different computer crimes that are there, they weren't there back then. And I think we're at that point again, where there is a lot of laws that don't exist when it comes to artificial intelligence. Do you treat it as a person? If a business, if an AI agent makes a mistake for a business, who's at fault? There's still a lot of systems where, if you've ever heard that phrase, one throat to choke, that if something goes wrong, I mentioned the problem with the data before, that if something went wrong, there's a human that they would go after. If the AI makes that mistake, who do you go after? Do you go after the company? Do you go after the developer? What if there is no developer? What if it's a business person? What if it was a hallucination that caused the problem? These are not, well, first off, they're not technical problems. They're law and business problems. And right now, there is no laws to protect it. I mark my word that you're going to start seeing attorneys that's going to start focusing on AI law, especially as people start getting into it. So if you're looking for a field, I think that's going to be one that's going to start coming open. But right now, it's too new and it's changing so rapidly. I don't know what's going to happen. And of course, uncertainty, like what I'm trying to display. Uncertainty is not what business likes because uncertainty drives stock prices down. And stock prices going down means CEOs are made available to the industry. Now, I did mention that whole Waymo thing. And to end that story, again, it stopped right there. And it wasn't trying to cut my wife. It was actually trying to cut the car in front of us. But my wife's a sweet driver. She doesn't like when people try to do something rude. So what did? She honked her horn. And, of course, the Waymo turned off its signal and took off up the road. Tells you, really, if it was as easy as honking your horn would have stopped Skynet, the Terminator movies would have been a lot shorter than they were. But the funny thing, and what leads to my next point, is after this happened, of course, my wife was not very happy. First thing she said is, I'm never going to use Waymo. So really, there you have an AI that did something that lost a customer. Maybe it lost multiple customers, who knows? Maybe it'll lose more customers than I'm telling you. And it's not because I'm not willing or we're not willing to drive in autonomous vehicles. If you've ever had a chance to ride in a Zoox, Zoox are awesome. They're like little meeting pods on wheels, and we've ridden one of those. There's no driver, there's no steering wheel. It's just a box and wheels. Really cool. Did a short one. It was neat that one time I did it. So I'm not against it, but we were against Waymo. And the reason why is because something it did hurt its brand. That's another problem businesses are having right now. If they see a problem with basically customers' perception, they see a brand problem, they tend to stay away from it. Again, if AI makes a mistake, the potential of losing a lot of customers is extremely high, especially if it's really, sometimes the mistakes are kind of funny. I think we've all seen the YouTube or TikTok, I don't remember where the video was from, but the video that somebody was trying to talk to the chatbot at McDonald's and was ordering like a large drink or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it ended up giving him like over 200 orders of chicken McNuggets. It's like, no, that's not what it was doing. It's funny. It didn't really do anything bad, but that's not necessarily. There can be trust issues if something really bad happens. Back in 2023, and this is where AI has gotten that bad connotation. So back in 2023, there was a movie came out, and I'm a horror movie buff, but there was a movie came out called Late Night with the Devil. Great movie. It was a fun one, but one of the problems it had is that as part of the movie, and they were just three, basically stills. They were those intermission signs because it's about a late night TV show, and these are the "we'll be right back" type signs. There was three of them, and the film creators, they didn't use an artist; they used AI to create those three images, and the amount of review bombs that movie got. And the amount of protests that movie got because of three images. The rest of it was still all shot with people and whatnot. It was three images. And it's because that perception of AI slop, and as I was researching this earlier today, I did not realize that AI slop was actually the 2025 word of the year. And I even validated it. Yes, it is, I think, in the Webster's Dictionary. It's the word of the year because it was used so much last year. And how many times do you go on YouTube? And if one thing, yes, I have AI slot behind me when it comes to, because it's kind of a messy piece, but you'd see my room behind me is even worse. But the fact that people would call it that, and people will look for, you're looking for those six fingers and the missing heads. You're knowing that there's bad stuff. Ugly stuff, and that people tend to frown upon that, look down whenever people start using that. Well, when it comes to business, you don't want anything that's actually going to basically detract from your customer base. You don't want to make people actually not like what you're doing. Did certain people not go to that movie because of those three images? I don't know. There's also situations like, and this is actually the most bizarre one that hurt Air Canada, and this one kind of falls into the accountability too because it was illegal. Back I want to say it was last year. Actually, I'm trying to remember exactly when it was. But there was somebody that was conversing with the chatbot on Air Canada's website. And the chatbot made up a refund policy. It was not something, it was not, the refund policy was on the website, but I guess it was hard to find, or, like a lot of people, though, if it's a chatbot, you might go to that first because it's kind of like doing a Google search. If you can find it faster that way than actually trying to walk through pieces, why not? Well, the chatbot actually made or created or hallucinated the refund policy. And so when the person, they bought the full fare ticket, when they put in basically the form to get reimbursed for however much of the ticket was, it was actually a person said, no, we won't reimburse it. You didn't follow our refund policy. Well, the person had saved the transcript of the chatbot and said, well, no, wait a minute. This is what your chatbot said. That went to court. And the funny thing is, the person who was chatting won. Even though, and the fact Air Canada did this amazes me because it was not that much money. But Air Canada says, well, it's not our fault. It was the chatbot's fault. And it comes to that accountability piece. What are the laws? They're not there yet. Judge sided against Air Canada. Air Canada had to pay money. So consumer perception, if it's something that would distract and not generate revenue, a conservative company, not going to deal with it. Next thing, and this one actually kind of ties to my first video that I did talking about this specific topic. And it's talking about skills. One of the problems that a lot of these companies have, and most people don't realize that even companies that you don't think of technology companies has technology. They have developers. I forget who said it, but somewhere I'd heard claim that every company is a technology company now. But there's still, you have loads. Matter of fact, there's probably more developers worldwide in the companies you would not think of as technology companies than like the FANG companies or the manga, however you want to call it today. The problem with it is that even if businesses did want to jump in and start doing, these pilots or these small projects, right now they don't have the skill set, and then I'm not talking about, being able to open up Claude Code and prompt it and get code or whatnot. No, the problem, and where I see a great opportunity for people moving forward, especially in the technology or the business space, is to be in both camps. Understanding the technology, but also understanding the business problem. And of course, my second video, I'm going to plug all my videos. All my videos I'm going to put into the description below. But understanding whenever you give that business problem and it generates the code, because that's the way you're using those agentic tools, that it generates code that you understand. Does my code match what this business problem is? That's a gap right now. And it's actually one of those things, it's probably one of the big things that's actually slowing people down. Let's say you even had ability to use the data. We don't have those personnel. So really, it's not whether or not you might not have data, but you have technology. And, plenty of agents out there. It's not hard to get one of those. I know there's going to be people who are going to be mad for me to hear this, but we have a people shortage problem. A people shortage of somebody who can understand a business problem and a technology problem, and what's created between them, that bridge person. We're lacking that. And if anything you can take out of this is, if those are the skills, if you are looking for what to do and you don't want to be an AI attorney, that's the skills. And it's dire need. Companies cannot move forward without these people. But the last thing I want to mention, and this is probably, I don't want to say it's the dumbest thing. It's probably the most human thing when it comes to basically going from moving technologies. And it's fear. A nice way of saying it's people are resistant to change. No, it's purely fear. People are fearful for losing their jobs. They're fearful for what it's going to do. They're fearful that it's going to make their jobs harder. It's fear. It's also when people, especially if people are worried about losing their jobs, I'll tell you that middle management are worried about losing their jobs too, because if they have less people to manage, at least perception, they're not necessary anymore. So what's going to end up happening is that as many people as possible are going to push back. I will also say that change is extremely difficult. It's difficult not just from a person, but when you're trying to move technology. An organization, I've given this analogy many times. An organization is like a ship. And if any of y'all have boated before, you realize that when you turn the wheel, or when you turn the whatever you call it, I don't remember. I'm drawing a blank. Sorry about that. But when you turn the wheel on your boat, it doesn't turn right away. It actually turns slow, because as water's passing over, that's whenever your hull will start cutting into the water. The slower you're moving from a company perspective, the slower that turn is. The larger your boat is, the slower that turn is. These legacy blue chip companies that I'm talking about are very, very, very large ships. So even when they want to change, those small moves, they're so slow that you can almost not feel it. If anything, think of it like the Titanic, right? It knew the iceberg was coming, it turned, but it just could not turn fast enough. I'm not saying that other companies will be the iceberg, none whatsoever, but I'm just stating that the larger the company, the slower that adoption to anything. I mean, that's probably one of the scariest things when you start talking about these big companies. The change in AI is extremely fast. I mean, just in the last couple of years, the different versions of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Nova or any of those, it's not glacial. It's extremely fast. I remember back in 2000, I was actually at a conference in Palm Springs, and I was watching this talking about internet time. Because that was it. That was the beginning of really the heavy internet. And of course, this was right before the bomb happened, a little bit later that year. But everything was moving very fast. And a lot of companies were having problems moving that fast. AI makes internet time look slow. And if you're talking about companies that's going to be very, very slow to move, running into something that's rapidly changing, again, there's fear there. So, important thing that I can't stress enough. None of this works in these companies, especially these large conservative companies, without complete buy-in from the leaders below. If there's any level that resists, it's not going to succeed. So, with all that said, what's my opinion? Is this going to work? Are we going to see? Well, again, I've been in this field a long time, and I'm giving you my opinion, my outlook on what's going to happen. I think, honestly, what's happening in AI is extremely promising. Again, I'm skeptical because I think every person, especially in technology, don't buy the hype. You need to be skeptical, simply because nothing, especially things that you got the don't want to call them snake oil salesmen. You got the nice slick suits trying to push something. I have too many times seen what's called vaporware or PowerPointware, where something is promised and what you get is not what's promised. So it's made me a skeptic. I think that AI is an extremely powerful tool. I think we have a long way to go. I think there's going to be some other challenges that's going to hit us, but it's not the technology itself. It's not the idea. But I also think it's an extremely powerful tool. I think that as long as you have these people who understand the bridge between the business and technology, again, learning the code in between, because never trust implicitly what that AI is giving you, because hallucinations are real. I've seen it happen. Even on some of the most small things, I've seen it happen. So I wouldn't bet your entire company just on blind trust. Trust but verify. But I think, honestly, in the long term, I see a bright future for people that can do this, because they're honestly going to be the most valuable people to an organization. Those that can bridge that gap. Will it mean less jobs in the future? I don't think so. I honestly, just like back in 2000 before .com, there was a huge surge of people that were calling themselves developers. And I'm not downing anybody. If you want to pick up a compiler and write code, have at it. I've got tutorials for you to go watch. But there's plenty of ways to learn, just as long as you learn. But there was a ton of people who were not getting in it for the right reason. They were not getting in it to become developers or become engineers or become designers or become architects. They were doing it to get a paycheck. Wrong, wrong reasons, and they kind of weeded themselves out. I don't think the layoffs that are happening right now is that. Maybe some of them are, but most of them, I will bet dollars to donuts that most people who have been let go in the last couple years, whenever the Silicon banks and the free money from the government from COVID, when it all dried up and they couldn't figure out something, they were a one trick show. They had to come up with something to look profitable. How did they do it? They reduced operational costs by reducing people. I still see that in the future, this is going to be a rising field. Just like whenever I started in the early 90s, the systems that we were building were honestly extremely simplistic compared to the things that are built today. And honestly, with the power of things like AI, it's just going to continue. Things like quantum computing, it's another technology. It's going to grow things. There's going to be more positions out there. Do you have to tailor yourself different? Absolutely. But I definitely see, once we get through these dark times, once the pendulum swings from everybody doesn't have a job to we got to hire everybody. And it does swing. And I've seen it swing 4 times now, maybe 5. It's been a long time. But whenever it swings the other way, I see, number one, a lot of hope happening for the people that are ready for it. And of course, how do you get ready for it? Learn technology, learn the tools, learn business, understand how those two bridge together. You do that, you have all the tools in your toolbox to hit that bright future in the future. That's not normal. So that's what I've got. Now, I'm going to do more of these. There's other topics I want to talk about, but I wanted to get these 3 out now because I'm seeing so much out there already. Again, I come from both a technical and a business side. So that bridging the gap that I mentioned before, kind of already been doing it, even though I never planned for it. But I wanted to, as a industry veteran, give my perception of what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing all the comments on all the videos. And of course, the 2 videos I did other than this, I did one is why basically AI is not going to replace developers, because I don't think it's feasible. I just think AI is going to basically empower more development to make more and more complex systems. And also talked about why beginners should learn code. And when I say beginners, I'm not talking about your 20-year-olds. I'm talking about anybody who's never written a line of code. And even if you have written a line of code, learning the new languages, learning what's there, because maybe that language that you had, back in the day, I had COBOL developers. COBOL's not the future, but maybe Rust is, or C++, or Swift, or Java, or whatever it may be. To pick up the book, pick up the code, start writing things, build something, so that you know when the time is there, you're ready. So again, I'm going to put the links to both of those videos in the description. But that's the reason, honestly, it's the reason I've created this channel, is that I wanted to give my perception on everything that's happening in this field. I have done this for so long. I have seen so much. I've been in so many different technologies and industries that seeing what's going on, I don't feel there's enough people talking about it. And so being that mentor to the world was honestly the reason I wanted to do this. Appreciate you taking the time watching this one. I see how long this one is. Oh, I don't see my timer. But I appreciate you watching all of this if you've gotten to this far. And if you have, I've got a question for you. Now, the question is, have you subscribed to the channel? Because by now, if you haven't, definitely make sure to do it. But now the question I have, and I want you to drop it into the comments. Now, whenever I say this, because if you notice, I don't talk about what companies I'm with. I don't talk about what technologies. I don't talk about specifics. Reason being, we all under NDAs. That's just the way things work. Plus, it's just bad form to talk about your companies. But what I would like to get in the comments is that if you are in a company, and I don't care if it's a startup or a government or major company, I don't care where you work, but if you're in a company and your company has tried to do something in AI, did it pass or fail? And if it failed, why? Just out of curiosity, to share your knowledge to the rest of the world. Appreciate you coming along. We'll be doing this again really soon. Of course, I'm going to be jumping back into my other tutorials because I want to start getting those out there too before I jump into the deeper concepts of computer science. But until next time,